Russia's T-90 tank is supposed to be one of the jewels in the country's ground-based forces. President Vladimir Putin has hailed it as the best tank in the world, and, when used appropriately, it should provide Russia with a clear advantage over Ukraine and its limited tank options. However, over the last 2.5 years, we've seen Russia using its T-90 sparingly, if at all, and when it does, it's losing the tanks heavily. Over 100 of them, in fact. All of which brings us to the simple question, why? Not only why is Russia losing so many T-90s, but why has it been so slow to deploy them? And why, once the tanks were in the field, has Russia failed to gain a significant advantage from them? We'll answer all of those questions in this video, though we'll start by answering another. What makes the T-90 supposedly so special? After all, March 2024 saw Russia receive a new batch of the T-90 from Rostec, the state's main defense and aerospace conglomerate, suggesting it still holds the tank in high regard. Just a month prior to that delivery, Putin stood in front of a crowd during a trip to Unravel and lauded it as the world's best tank, while simultaneously calling on his country to develop even more advanced fighting vehicles. A mixed message suggesting that Russia sees weakness in its flagship tank, though Putin attempted to convey confidence during the statement. T-90 is the best tank in the world without any exaggeration, he told onlookers. Our tankmen and the adversary recognize it as the best in the world. Perhaps Putin has a point. Entered into service in 1992, the T-90 main battle tank, or MBT, was designed and built by Unravel, the company to which Putin gave his speech, and is crewed by 3 people. The tank is a behemoth measuring 31.2 feet long and 12.4 feet high, meaning it towers over any soldiers who are unfortunate enough to come across it on the battlefield. The tank itself builds upon the designs of Russia's Soviet-era T-series, though it's reported to offer greater mobility, more protection, and far stronger firepower than those older tanks. Speaking of firepower, the T-90 has a single 125mm 2A46M smoothbore gun, which is fitted with a thermal sleeve and stabilized on the tank using a pair of axes. The thermal sleeve improves the gun's lifespan as it regulates the barrel's temperature during firing, preventing the thermal expansion that can lead to warping, inaccuracies, and misfires. The gun is also well designed, with its tube being replaceable without the crew having to dismantle the entire turret, enabling rapid repairs when in the field. Add versatility into the mix. The 2A46M can fire high-explosive fragmentation, armor-piercing, discarding sabot, and high-explosive anti-tank rounds, and you get a gun that can be adapted to confront almost any situation the T-90 faces on the ground. Then there's the 9M11 Reflex anti-tank guided missile system built into the T-90. That missile system has a range between 328 and 13,123 feet, making it suitable for firing on opposition tanks at short or medium range. It's also fast. It takes just 11.7 seconds to reach its maximum speed of 13,120 feet, meaning the missile can travel at speeds faster than 1,000 feet per second. The 9M119 comes into its own when used against tanks that have explosive reactive armor, or ERA, which is designed to withstand kinetic rounds and the high-explosive anti-tank rounds fired from the T-90's main gun. In other words, if the gun won't do it, the T-90 can send a missile to get the job done. Each missile weighs 51.5 pounds, with the missile system even capable of targeting low-flying and relatively slow-moving aerial targets such as helicopters. The hollow charge warhead is extremely damaging, with the missile also being loaded with a laser beam riding guidance system to help it reach its target. Again, we see versatility, meaning the T-90 is packed with weaponry that should, in theory, allow it to tackle both ground-based and aerial targets. Add a 12.7mm air defense machine gun and a 7.62mm coaxial PKT machine gun to the mix, and the 3-person crew has a lot of options when it comes to firing on the enemy. Of course, these options would mean little without adequate protection. A tank is a slow-moving target, even if it packs a big punch, so Russia had to ensure the T-90 was capable of standing up to enemy firepower. A combination of the previously mentioned ERA and conventional armor plating make up the bulk of the T-90's protection. The Stora 1 defensive suite adds to this armor, is designed to offer early warning systems and help to conceal the T-90 when it's under threat of attack. Features of this suite include a laser warning system that uses 4 receivers to inform the crew of incoming threats. An infrared jammer can help to disrupt weaponry that's on course to strike the T-90s, and the Stora 1 even has a grenade discharging system. Rather than being used to attack the enemy, that system generates an aerosol screen intended to shield the T-90 from vision. All of this is controlled with a computerized system. On the maneuverability front, the T-90 comes with an 840 horsepower 4-stroke V12 piston engine fueled by a combination of diesel and either benzene or kerosene. It carries several fuel tanks, which are armor-plated and combined to hold up to 351 gallons of fuel. But perhaps the most interesting feature is its snorkel system. Designed for deep riding, the system can be activated within 20 minutes and allows the tank to ford 16.4 feet of water as long as it's loaded with the appropriate equipment. So the T-90, when looking at its specifications alone, is an impressive piece of equipment. Several other countries certainly seem to think so. The Indian Army started ordering T-90s from Russia in 2004, rechristening the tank as the Bhishma in the process. According to Army Technology, India has purchased 300 T-90s from Russia and currently operates 1,100 of the tanks, with the rest having been built internally using parts provided by the Russian military. Algeria is also a regular buyer of the tank, as shown by a March 2006 order for 180 of them. Uganda has at least 44 T-90s, with Saudi Arabia also buying 150 of the tanks in September 2009. This base T-90 model has gone through numerous upgrades in the years since its introduction, culminating in the T-90M model 2017, also known as the Proyev 3. It's this upgraded version that Putin believes is the best tank in the world. Designed in the wake of Russia's counter-terrorism operations in Syria in the 2010s, the T-90M has a more powerful engine than the T-90, upgraded to 1,130 horsepower compared to the standard version's 840, and is equipped with the PNM Sosna U gun-of-view system. This gives the T-90M all-weather capabilities, while improving its targeting tracking. Upgraded era and a new steering wheel have been built into the latest variant of the T-90, as has a removable turret bustle, allowing the tank to store 8 additional rounds. The T-90M is also faster than the base model, as it's capable of reaching speeds of up to 37.2 miles per hour, and it can cruise for up to 341.7 miles. Beyond that, the T-90M uses the same weapon systems as those built into the base T-90. Regardless of the variant used, Russia has a tank that it should not only be able to use to strengthen its army, but is desirable enough that other countries are willing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to get their hands on it. No wonder Putin claims it to be the best tank in the world. But there's a problem. For as powerful as the T-90 and T-90M appear to be on paper, it's proven somewhat ineffectual in the war in Ukraine. So ineffectual, in fact, that Russia has lost far more of them than it could have ever anticipated. On July 16, 2024, Newsweek reported that the T-90M tank losses had reached a grim milestone. It was on this date that those losses hit the 3-figure region, with Newsweek quoting the open-source war track Oryx as claiming that Russia has lost 100 of its T-90Ms since the beginning of the Ukraine war. However, that 100 number may be a misnomer. Oryx says that it only records a loss when photographic or video evidence is available, meaning the actual number of T-90 and T-90M losses may be significantly higher than recorded here. Even so, these 100 T-90 losses are now part of the 3,235 tanks Russia has lost during the war, 2,199 of which are confirmed to be destroyed, that Oryx has recorded. Ukraine's defense ministry says the number is much higher, putting Russian tank losses at 8,227, more than double the amount that Oryx has been able to visually confirm. Assuming the defense ministry's numbers are accurate, this would suggest that Russia has actually lost more than 200 of its T-90s in Ukraine. This wasn't supposed to happen. Speaking to the Kyiv Independent, Martin J. Doherty, the author of Aircraft, Tanks and Artillery of the Ukraine War, points out that the T-90 is a combination of the best parts of the T-72 and the T-80. The former's proven chassis combined with the advanced weapon systems built into the T-80 to create a tank that should be more than capable of handling operations in Ukraine. This should have been a winning combination, Doughty says, and until the invasion of Ukraine, the overall impression was positive. Looks are clearly deceiving. Which brings us to another question. Why is Russia losing so many T-90Ms and earlier variants of the tank in Ukraine? There are several possible reasons, starting with something that often goes unstated in Russian rhetoric when describing the T-90. The tank wasn't built to handle the newer generation of top attack weapons that Ukraine has been deploying to counter Russia's tanks. That's according to Doughty, who points out that the T-90 defenses were developed to counter traditional threats, with those defenses carrying over to the 4th generation T-90M. That lack of top-down defenses is something that Ukraine has been able to capitalize on. That's according to Warrior Maven, which noted in a July 2023 report that Ukraine has been using an anti-armor weapon called an N-Law to take out tanks. Made by Saab Bofors Dynamics, the weapon was a joint venture between the UK and Sweden, both countries that are providing military aid to Ukraine, and is a lightweight and portable missile that can be fired by dismounted infantry. In other words, soldiers on the ground can use it in ambushes against patrolling troops, buildings, and light armored vehicles. The weapon is also effective against tanks. Though the NLAW won't always fully penetrate a tank's armor, the fact that it's a top-down weapon means that it can be lethal as long as a soldier targets the tank from an elevated position. Add to this the fact that an NLAW can fire a high-explosive anti-tank round, and you have a weapon that Ukraine can use to counter the T-90's seemingly impressive defenses. Still, there are other factors at play, according to Doughty. One that goes underreported, yet plagues the entire Russian army, is the issue of poorly trained crews. Remember that the T-90M requires a crew of 3 highly trained soldiers if it's to be used effectively. However, several encounters between Russian and Ukrainian forces have shown the Russians to be tactically inept. For instance, February 2023 saw Russia attempt to take the town of Volodar, which sits about 93 miles southwest of Bakhmut. That offensive resulted in Russian soldiers fleeing, leaving behind over 30 armored vehicles. Reporting on the incident, the Institute for the Study of War says that footage of Russia's assault demonstrated highly dysfunctional tactics, suggesting that the personnel deployed were not only poorly trained, but were operating under poor command. Russia has been attempted to overcome these training issues by simply throwing more soldiers at its assaults. The tactic has worked on several occasions, but it also means that Russia absorbs massive losses, both in people and equipment, in the process. The T-90M is increasingly becoming a victim of that approach. As Doughty points out, losses can also be attributed to mishandling by inept commanders. So some of the T-90M losses can be put down to Ukraine countering them with weapons for which the tank's defenses weren't designed. Others are a result of tactical ineptness. Commanders aren't using the tanks correctly, and at least some are likely being crewed by soldiers who have inadequate training. But there are other reasons why T-90M losses are increasing, one of which is extremely logical. It's sending more of the tanks into the battlefield. Writing for Forbes in October 2023, military expert David Axe points out that Russia's heavy T-90M losses may not be the good news it appears to be for Ukraine. Instead, he argues, it's a sign that Russia has been increasing the numbers of its flagship tanks in Ukraine, suggesting that its production is increasing to the point where it believes it's able to replenish the tanks quickly. In other words, Russia is willing to risk its T-90s because it has more in reserve than it did at the beginning of the war. Axe argues that the tank's manufacturers, Orel-Vagonzavod, have had time to manufacture several hundred more T-90 variants since the Ukraine war began, and he uses increased losses as evidence. Look closely, says Axe, as he points out that Russia's losses of its Soviet-era T-62s peaked in October 2022. That was followed by a peak in losses of its T-80s in June 2023, followed by the peak we're now seeing in T-90 losses. The argument is that Russia relied so heavily on its older tanks during the early stages of the war to give itself more time to manufacture the more dangerous T-90. Now it has sufficient numbers, it's deploying more of its modern tanks, which means it'll naturally lose more of those tanks. Is that really the case? Axe says it all depends on how many T-90Ms Russia is producing, with numbers varying depending on the source. For instance, Bulgarian military reported in January 2024 that Russia is taking delivery of 130 T-90M tanks annually as of the end of 2023. That would suggest production is approximately matching the number of T-90M losses in Ukraine, as reported by Oryx. However, the outlet also notes that this is the same as the number of T-90Ms being produced before the war, and that it's possible that Russia is actually making fewer than 130. The International Institute for Strategic Studies, or IISS, digs deeper. In June 2024, the IISS published an article in which it outlined quarterly deliveries of the T-90M to Russia. It suggests that at least 13 batches of the tanks have been built since February 2022, with each of those batches containing between 11 and 15 tanks. All told, this would amount to at least 231 T-90Ms having been built between April 2020 and May 2024, up to a potential maximum of 267 during the period. How does that stack up to the 130 per year estimate? Looking at IISS's 2023 figures, we can see Russia took delivery of at least 11 T-90Ms in January. A further 11 arrived in May, with 2 more deliveries of 11 each in July and October. December saw 2 deliveries, one of around 15 and another assumed to be 11 tanks. That adds up to 70 tanks, 50 fewer than the 130 per year Russia was making before the war. However, there's a caveat here. Russia's pre-war T-90M production likely factored in tanks being made for sale to other countries. Given that Russia is selling less of its weapons with the war ongoing, it may have scaled back T-90M production to save money while still building enough of the tanks to match pre-war stock that it was keeping for itself. The IISS also points out that many of the T-90Ms entering Ukraine could be upgraded versions of T-90As. Upgrading those old models would cut production times, though it also comes with the issue of dwindling stocks. Russia may have as few as 50 T-90As in storage as of late 2023, with a further 100 in active service by early 2024. So what does all of this mean for Russia and its T-90M losses in Ukraine? It's clear that Russia is building more of the tanks, even if the rate at which it's doing so is disputed. As David Axe points out, it's already burned through much of its stock of the older T-62 and T-80 tanks, meaning it has fewer of them available to deploy. All of this means that more T-90Ms are heading into Ukraine, which, when considering Ukraine has NLAWs to counter them, and the crews of those T-90Ms are possibly poorly trained, would naturally lead to a spike in T-90M losses for Russia. A logical conclusion. However, it also can't escape notice that Ukraine has been coming up with increasingly novel ways to destroy the supposed best tank in the world. We've already covered NLAWs and how they give Ukraine top-down attack capabilities that can overwhelm a T-90's defenses. But in the absence of NLAWs, Ukraine has shown that Russia's flagship tank has a surprising array of vulnerabilities that allow it to be taken out by less conventional means. For instance, there's at least one recorded instance of Ukraine defeating a T-90M with armored vehicles. In January 2024, Forbes reported on drone footage captured in Stepova, which is just outside Avdiivka. The town has been a key location since the beginning of the war, with Russia finally managing to take it in February 2024. But at the time the footage was shot, fighting was still ongoing and intense. The footage shows a pair of M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles circling a T-90M tank. The vehicles, which weigh about 30 tons each, should have been no match for the tank and its superior weapon systems. However, the M2s were doing well. One, acting as a decoy, rattled off a few rounds from its 25mm automatic cannon before speeding away from the tank, as the second came to within feet of the T-90M to open fire with its own 25mm armor-piercing rounds. The tag team was doing well until a near disaster struck. The M2s ran out of armor-piercing rounds. That should have made them easy pickings for the T-90M, which had withstood the initial onslaught well. However, the crews of the M2s wouldn't give up, both switched to high-explosive rounds. While that sounds like a better alternative, the high-explosive rounds are less powerful than the armor-piercing ones, or at least in the context of trying to pierce a tank's armor. Worse yet, the M2's armor-piercing rounds hadn't lived up to their name. The T-90M's reactive armor had repelled them long before they reached the several inches of composite-base armor lying underneath. Then, an idea. One of the M2 crew members, who gave his name as Serhiy to Forbes, decided to change his target. Rather than penetrating the T-90M's armor, he would hit its optics. "I started blinding him so he couldn't leave," he claimed afterward. What followed was the T-90M taking a battering from explosive autocannon rounds, which triggered its explosive reactive armor to the point where the armor itself destroyed the tank's optics. The turret went into an uncontrollable spin, and the tank rolled away, hitting a tree before the three-person crew bailed. With the crew gone, Ukraine was free to destroy the T-90M with a drone the next day. This incredible footage showcases two of the issues we've touched on already in the video. First, the T-90M's defenses aren't as impressive as they first appear, especially when stacked up against unexpected tactics and weaponry. Second, it's clear that well-trained Ukrainian troops can defeat the poorly trained crews manning many T-90Ms. A pair of M2 armored fighting vehicles should have been fodder for the supposed best tank in the world. Instead, they managed to take it out using clever tactics and by exploiting vulnerabilities in the T-90M's defenses. This is far from the only instance of Ukraine taking out T-90Ms with interesting tactics. In May 2024, Newsweek reported on new footage that showed several Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, descending on the location of a T-90M tank somewhere along the front lines of the war. Published on Telegram, the video showcases a kamikaze UAV flying directly onto the tank's engine, followed by a second one that maintained distance to shoot at the tank's turret. The assault damaged the T-90M's guidance system, essentially immobilizing it before several Ukrainian units tried to set fire to the vehicle. That didn't work. So it was up to another drone operator to finish the job. In a statement released after the footage emerged, Ukrainian fighters said, "We got tired of watching this," referring to the attempts to set the T-90M ablaze. And one of our pilots decided to show a masterclass, hitting clearly between the turret and the hull of the tank. That was all it took. The T-90M burst into flames, and Ukraine had proven that it could take out Russia's flagship tank using nothing more than a handful of inexpensive drones and a lot of skill. NLAWs, M2s, and UAVs, a combination of weapons and vehicles that have proven to be useful against a T-90M. In the case of two of those weapons, the NLAWs and UAVs, Ukraine has shown that the best tank in the world isn't fit for purpose in a modern war. At least it's not as dominating as Russia believed it would be, as its defenses fail to account for innovation that allows it to be hit from the top. As for the victory using M2s, Ukraine has showcased that several of Russia's T-90M losses come from the tank crews not having tactical nous needed to take on the better-trained Ukrainian enemies. And then there are the T-90Ms that Russia has lost simply because their crews have abandoned their positions. 2 months after Ukraine took out a T-90M using nothing but UAVs, the Kyiv Post published a report that soldiers from the country's Hunter Brigade had managed to capture a fully working T-90M. Wolverine tankers from the Hunting Brigade, named after Oleska Dovbush, on one of the sectors where soldiers perform combat tasks, managed to capture a tank in practically full-up working condition, a report stated after the capture. The report also provided photographs of what it claimed was a large-scale assault by Russia that descended into a complete fiasco. That fiasco resulted in the T-90M either being abandoned or somehow left uncrewed, allowing a member of the Ukrainian Hunter Brigade to simply sneak up, jump inside, and drive it back to Ukraine's position. That was in addition to the capture of a T-80 and a BMP-2 armored fighting vehicle, both of which were also captured and driven back. The report concluded with a chilling message. Now these trophies will mercilessly destroy their previous owners. Again, we can only put this incident down to the inadequate training cited earlier in the video, combined with poor command, as a combination of both would have led to the fiasco. In this case, Russia's soldiers failed enormously, so much so that they left a valuable asset unguarded, allowing Ukraine to steal it from right under their noses. By now we have a good picture of why Russia is experiencing so many T-90M losses in the war. It's maintaining some level of production, likely between 70 and 130 T-90Ms per year, which is allowing it to slowly introduce more of its best tanks to the battlefield. But more tanks lead to more losses as a natural outcome of war. It's also being spurred on to introduce more of its T-90Ms because it's losing so many of its cheaper Soviet-era tanks. As their stockpiles dwindle, Russia is using newer and more expensive tanks. Then, of course, there's Ukraine's ability to counter the T-90M threat. Russia's tank can't stand up to NLAW fire, and it's being shown to be vulnerable to UAVs and even well-trained soldiers operating the kinds of vehicles the T-90M should easily be able to destroy. Throw inadequate training and inconsistent command into the mix, and you have a recipe for losses. There's only one question left to ask. What can Russia do next? Right now, its T-90M losses aren't so heavy that it can't replenish them over time. However, it's also manufacturing new tanks in such limited quantities that the T-90M will only ever see a limited role in Ukraine. Still, it also has an even newer tank that it claims is even better than the T-90M, the T-14. So why haven't we heard much about this tank's exploits in Ukraine? The answer is simple. In April 2023, Reuters reported on the debut of this new tank in Ukraine. However, we've heard little about it since because Russia is using it in an extremely limited capacity. Production of the tank, which has an unmanned turret operated by a crew in an isolated and armored chamber within the tank's hull, is likely less than 50 per year, according to the British military. As for its usage, it appears the T-14 is being kept behind the front lines, from where it occasionally fires on Ukrainian positions. It's not front and center in the war in the same way the T-90 is. The reason for that is twofold. First, it's an extremely expensive tank, with Newsweek reporting that production is so slow simply because Russia doesn't have the money to make more. Add to that some concerns on Russia's part. It's already seen Ukraine destroy more than 100 of its T-90Ms, with more likely to come, which has exposed the tank as being weaker than it was believed to be. Perhaps the T-14 has similar vulnerabilities, resulting in it being kept out of the battle, so Russia can claim it's the world's most advanced tank without having to prove it. Whatever the case may be, the T-14 is a non-factor at the time of writing this video, while the T-90M is proven to be less effective than Russia hoped. Ukrainian innovation, ingenuity, and tactical superiority have shown that it doesn't matter if you have the best tank in the world if your crews can't operate it and the tank is vulnerable to weapons it was never designed to combat. What do you think about the saga of the T-90M? Has Ukraine exposed it by finding so many novel ways to take it out? Or is the T-90M's failure in Ukraine due to Russia's poor tactics and lack of training? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching the video.